back, 8th graders, we're going to start 8-6 example 1, and I'm going to teach you how to find zeros using another method. We've already learned one method. We learned that we could graph our equation and find the zeros. Now that does work if the zeros are integers. It works better. You can still get pretty close to the answer. And then factoring is our second strategy. So that's what we're going to be doing in this particular section, 8.6, is learning how does factoring help me figure it out. So the problem with factoring, much like graphing, factoring has a little bit of a problem because not every quadratic equation is factorable. So that's not an option for something you can't factor. So let's focus in on example 1. All 4 of these are all factored forms of a quadratic. They're either 2 binomials or they're a GCF and a binomial. Okay? The way that you figure this out, notice that they're set equal to 0. Anything times 0 is 0. Okay? So if I take the first quantity, x minus 3, and I set it to 0, equal to 0, I solve for x by adding 3 to each side, and I now know that in the first quantity, if I plug in 3 for that x in the first quantity, it will zero it out. 3 minus 3 is 0, and anything, it doesn't matter what the second quantity is, anything times 0 equals 0, which is this number on the other side. So one of my zeros is positive 3. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the other quantity. I want to know what will zero that quantity out. So I take the quantity and I set it equal to 0. Take away 7, and you've got x equals negative 7. And there are your 2 zeros right there. Okay? Because there are 2 quantities there, I'm going to have 2 zeros. And the quantities are different. So that's how I know I'm going to have 2 different zeros, and there they are. You can also eyeball it. If you can tell what would zero out a quantity without doing the one-step equation, then do it that way. Sometimes I do it that way too. Let's look at B. See your 2 quantities? We want to figure out what would zero them out. So the first quantity, x, you're just going to take x and set it equal to 0, because it's the only one in its quantity. And so that's one of my zeros. My other one, x minus 5 equals 0. What zeros that x? Well, if I add 5 to each side, I clearly see that x is equal to 5. So here are my 2 zeros for that particular problem. So when they're in factored form, they're actually really easy to find the zeros for each quantity. Okay? So I'm going to leave C and D for you guys to do as extra credit. Just mimic what I just did and find those zeros, and bring your questions to class.